In this video, Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz from a Haredi yeshiva called Ohr Somayach discusses several relevant topics.
But I get hate mail both sides. I get hate mail for being anti-Zionist, and I get hate mail for being Zionist. So, which am I? I don't know.
If we are obligated to conquer the biblical land of Israel, does that mean that the Haredim, the Ultra Orthodox Jews, should also serve in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces?
So as a result, there are voices in the Haredi world that are beginning to say, well, maybe we should just try to save the best learners or the most conscientious people, and maybe other Haredim should go to the army.
Should people from outside of Israel then also be obligated to join the IDF and join the war effort?
Somebody in America is knocking the fact that Haredim are not in the army. Well, why isn't he in the army?
And finally, if we are at war, can we apply the leniency that we find in the Torah to capture a non-Jewish woman in battle? If you are new to my channel and you want to learn more about Judaism, conversion to Judaism, and Israel, then please subscribe to my channel. Also, remember to leave a comment below this video, as well as liking this video if you benefited from this video. The full video is in the description below, and this video was edited with a full written permission of Ohr Somayach. Rabbi, I have heard that there's an idea from Noahide, the Ramban, that we are obligated to conquer the biblical land of Israel, even if we live outside of Israel. According to this view from the Ramban, we should wage war to take back the biblical land of Israel and establish courts in Israel, even if that means killing people in the process. What is the Jewish law today regarding this issue?
For some reason, this seems to invite hate mail. But I get hate mail both sides. I get hate mail for being anti-Zionist, and I get hate mail for being Zionist. So, which am I? I don't know. Let me just, again, mention very, very Kitzur. Ramban writes at the end of the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs. Remember how it is? The Rambam wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs, Maimonides, and Ramban wrote a number of critiques on the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs. That's called Hasogos HaRamban. And at the end, the Ramban lists various commandments that he felt the Rambam omitted, meaning the Rambam gave you a list of 613. Ramban feels there are some omissions. Of course, that creates an intellectual dilemma, right? Because if you're stuck with 613 as your number, and Rambam gave you 613, and Ramban thinks Rambam left out a few, so for every one that Ramban adds, he has to take off one. And he doesn't. Ramban worked out the arithmetic. Okay. But in one of the forgetting mitzvahs that he says the Rambam allegedly forgot, is a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment in the Torah that is called Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, inhabiting the land of Israel. And the Ramban says this is a mitzvah d'oraisa, and he makes the point it is not limited to when there's a Beis HaMikdash. It applies every time, even today. And Ramban then says there are 4 components in the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. There's actually 4 chalakim in the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Component number 1 is to establish Jewish sovereignty, to conquer, if necessary, over all land that is within the biblical boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. This is actually a mitzvah to conquer and hold on to and have sovereignty over everything within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Let me point out that the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael are actually much larger than the boundaries of the state of Israel. The state of Israel and the land of Israel overlap a lot. I mean, 90% is an overlap. But they are separate in a few ways. For example, there are parts of the state of Israel that may not be part of Eretz Israel. Eilat would be an example. Conversely, there's parts of Lebanon and Syria that are actually within the halachic boundaries of Eretz Israel, even though they're not within the state of Israel. So Ramban says there is a mitzvah to conquer. That's component number one. Component number two is there is a mitzvah to make the area habitable, not just leave it as a desert, but to cultivate it either by residence or industry or agriculture, do something productive with the land, not to leave it shamama, not to leave it desolate. Then there's component number three, which is psychological. No Jew can regard any other country as their homeland. So even if you're living somewhere else, you have to look at Eretz Israel as your homeland. That's more psychological. And basically, component number four is you as an individual should live in Israel unless you have halachic reasons not to. You see, the first three are communal obligations. To conquer, to make it productive, etc. The fourth one is your individual obligation to live here. So this is called Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to give a talk about Zionism right now. Suffice it to say that the Rambam Maimonides does not count it as a mitzvah. And obviously there's a huge literature, a huge discussion in Achronim. What are the implications of Rambam's view? Does Rambam say it's not an obligation? I'm not telling you you have an obligation to live in Eretz Israel. I'm telling you the Ramban says you have an obligation to live in Eretz Israel. Rambam might say you don't have such an obligation, and therefore we have a question, who do we paskin like? And even like Ramban, who says you have an obligation, Ramban may qualify it if you have a heter to find a wife or a parnasa or the like. So it's not an open and shut case, but it is a mitzvah to live in Eretz Israel. I know someone's going to tell me, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, according to the Ramban, it is not a chiyuv mitzvah, it is only a kiyum mitzvah. That is Rav Moshe Feinstein's position, and certainly I am much, much lower than dirt under his shoes. But I have to say that he really is a minority of one in learning the Ramban. Every single parish from the time of the Ramban has understood the Ramban as making it a chiyuv and not just a mitzvah kiyuma. So please do not write me, Rav Moshe. Of course, I'm going to get attacked because I just insulted Rav Moshe, which, I knew Rav Moshe and I had the greatest reverence for the greatness of the man. All I'm saying is, this particular chiddush is a das yachid. Now, here's the implication. What you're focusing on is the implication of the first prong of the mitzvah. The first prong of the mitzvah is to establish Jewish sovereignty over all territory within the boundaries of Israel. So the Ramban says, if that has to be done by war, then you do it by war. In other words, what is called Milchemes Mitzvah, Ramban says, is not only killing Amalek or the 7 nations of Canaan. They're extinct, they're gone. But the Milchemes Mitzvah is establishing Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel. So, according to the Ramban, there would be a mitzvah, not necessarily to kill, but do what you have to do. There would be a mitzvah to do whatever would need it to be done to establish a sholita, a rulership over Eretz Yisrael. Now, I have to say, Al Pi Pshat, the Ramban is a direct contradiction to Neturei Karta's position. Neturei Karta takes the position, again, based on a Gemara in Ksubis, that it is forbidden to have a Jewish state before the coming of Mashiach. Well, the one thing we could say with certainty is Ramban could not agree to that, because the Ramban actually learns that the chiyuv of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is not only to live in Israel, but to establish Jewish sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael. That's another way of saying have a Jewish state. Now, yeah, we could argue other things. It's not a religious state. That's a separate argument. But the idea that you can't have a state until Mashiach comes, that is 100% inconsistent with the Ramban. Now again, the Torah character could say, all right, we're following the Rambam. We're not following the Ramban. Okay, that's fine. I'm not here to argue that point either. But all I'm saying is, Ramban obviously cannot agree with the premises of Neturei Karta, because that is the very mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the establishment of a Jewish state.
Rabbi, what is your thoughts on the Haredi exemption to be drafted into the Israeli Defense Forces? Should the Haredim serve in the IDF, especially considering the fact that the Haredim population here in Israel is growing? Do you believe that the Haredi draft exemption to the IDF is sustainable, considering all these factors?
Again, I don't want to give some definitive position. I'm not a person who's able to give a definitive position. You should know that this is a major, major issue that is being debated not only between secular or non-Haredi to Haredi, within the Haredi world. Now, things are going to be reevaluated. Let me just give you some of the things to think about. On one hand, we have this category called Milchemes Mitzvah. There are certain cases where we're commanded to wage war. And the Rambam says the three categories of Milchemes Mitzvah, you're commanded to wage war, is to get rid of Amalek. Okay, we don't really have genealogical Amalek. Get rid of the 7 nations of Canaan. We don't have that either. But the third category is to protect the Jewish people from an enemy that is trying to destroy them. And it happens to be that, generally speaking, the wars that the state of Israel fight since 1948 are wars against enemies that want to destroy us. So that actually means that we would characterize the wars in Eretz Yisrael by the terminology of Milchemes Mitzvah. That's step one. It's classified as a Milchemes Mitzvah. Okay. What is the significance of calling something a Milchemes Mitzvah? Why is that an important designation? The reason why Milchemes Mitzvah is an important designation is the Torah does exempt a number of people from war, a newly married person who didn't live in his house. But the Gemara in Saita says the exemptions from war only apply to optional wars of expansion, which we can't have today. You need a Sanhedrin for that. But Milchemes Mitzvah, there are no exemptions. So if you put 2 and 2 together, or 1 and 1 together, number one, and we'll question each premise. Number one, the wars that the state of Israel are fighting are called Milchemes Mitzvah. Number two, Milchemes Mitzvah, there are no exemptions. It would stand to reason that any type of exemption, because I'm learning Torah, or because I'm Haredi, or because of what, couldn't exist, because you're dealing with Milchemes Mitzvah. That would be the issue. Now, this assumes this is called the Milchemes Mitzvah. Now, there is a side question. Some say something is not a Milchemes Mitzvah unless there's a Melech, etc., which we don't have. So there are going to be some debates there. But if you assume that this is a Milchemes Mitzvah, it would stand to reason there are no exemptions. This would be the case for Haredi conscription. Milchemes Mitzvah, everybody has to partake. What is the counter-argument? Right? What is the counter-argument from a halachic perspective that Shiva Bacharim or whatever would be exempt? It's based on the following idea. It's based on a passage in the Rambam. The Rambam says at the end of Hilchos Shmita v'Yovel that the tribe of Levi was exempt from all war. And the implication is even Milchemes Mitzvah, meaning that's a super exemption. Shevet Levi is exempt, even from Milchemes Mitzvah, because their job was to learn full-time and teach Klal Yisrael. Which means there seems to be a Shevet Levi exemption that is much stronger than the Chassan and Kala exemption. That even applies to Milchemes Mitzvah, because we need ruchniistic leadership and the like. Okay, now literally, that only applies to Shevet Levi. That's not just going to apply, I'm not a Levi, right? So then they go with another part of the Rambam, where the Rambam says that when God created a special role for Shevet Levi, it's not limited to Shevet Levi, but it's anyone who truly devotes himself to learning the Torah of Hashem and to teaching the Torah should be elevated to Shevet Levi. Now, the Rambam isn't making a halachic conclusion there. The Rambam is talking mainly in Musar and Hashkafa, but someone will link the Rambam's situation of extending Shevet Levi and applying it to a full-time Torah student. Again, this is tenuous in a lot of ways. Number one, it's not so clear that Shevet Levi would be exempt from a Milchemes Mitzvah. And number two, even if they are exempt from Milchemes Mitzvah, it's not so clear that you can be a pseudo-Levi and put yourself in that exemption. And number three, Shevet Levi is a high level. It's not like, anybody who happens to be in yeshiva, or what about a Haredi person who's not in yeshiva? He works in a pizza place. Again, nothing wrong with that. Labor is labor. I'm not disparaging that. But is that a person who's going to say, I am a Shevet Levi whose life is totally devoted to Avodas Hashem? Okay, but that's one line of argument. One line of argument is that Haredi B'nai Torah fall under the Shevet Levi Geder, and al pi the Rambam, Shevet Levi could be exempt even from Milchemes Mitzvah. Questionable, but that would be the case. Argument number two is the following. This is argument number two, and this is really coming to a breaking point. Argument number two is, even if Milchemes Mitzvah requires that there are no exemptions, that would only be true if there would be a national emergency that would require your participation in the war effort. Meaning no army anywhere in the world drafts 100% of the people. So the argument goes, yeah, we know we're Haredim, we know we're obligated to serve if there would really be an emergency and a manpower shortage. But Baruch Hashem, there are enough soldiers who either volunteer or are drafted. They don't need us. We would actually be an inconvenience for them. Many generals pray that Haredim don't go into the army because they're going to wreak havoc with the demanding kashrus standards, and the women can't sing. So one of the arguments has always been, you don't need us. And if you don't need us, it's just harassment. It's cultural homogenization. You're just bringing us in so to assimilate and the like. Which is an argument. See, this is theoretically an argument that even if it is a Milchemes Mitzvah, okay, we'll come when we're needed, but we don't have to come if we're not needed. And fakert, if we're not needed and you're insisting we come, there is some element of Ben Gurion's vision that the purpose of the army was not just to defend Israel, but it was to create a melting pot society where everybody becomes the same. For many years, maybe I shouldn't say it this way, we got away with that argument because the truth of the matter is the army was not understaffed. There were always enough soldiers around, and we could always make the argument, you don't need us. And if you don't need us, it's better that we learn Torah. It's better that we keep our children away from negative influences. You don't need us. What has happened since October 7th, and again, I'm just honestly just sharing with you the problem there, is that this argument is getting stretched to the limit. This war is lasting a lot longer than many people thought it would last. And the Chayalim are being overstretched, overextended. They're coming back, they go for a few weeks, then they get a little time off, but they're going in and in and in and in, coming in with very, very few breaks. The Dati Leumi soldiers who do participate are being overstretched. So the question becomes, at what point can we plausibly make the argument we're not needed? I don't know. I'm not an expert in the numbers exactly. So if we would invoke the Rambam as our basis, so the Rambam gives a categorical exemption, possibly. But if you're going with the argument, they don't need us, it's not so pashut anymore. It's not so pashut. And as a result, there are two issues to keep in mind. One is an ethical issue, and the other is a political issue. And the Haredi world has to deal with both of them. The ethical issue is, which is also a halachic issue, is, hey, if it is a milchemes mitzvah and we're needed, maybe we have to reevaluate what's going on here. That's the ethical halachic issue. The political issue is, we can't get away with it anymore, meaning to say if we keep on holding this position, then there's going to be a counter-reaction the other way that's going to make it a lot worse. So maybe when you have this hungry lion, maybe you should throw the lion a few sheep so it won't attack the babies. So as a result, there are voices in the Haredi world that are beginning to say, well, maybe we should just try to save the best learners or the most conscientious people, and maybe other Haredim should go to the army. Again, this is both an ethical halachic response, and it is also a political response. Because if we don't give in a little bit on this issue, some say the consequences are going to be very, 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 very severe in terms of the reaction to society. So I know, again, I don't have the energy. I'm going to get a lot of reaction on this. But I'm trying to be as even-handed as possible so you understand both sides of this issue. Now, it does happen to be, that the army environment is a dangerous, of course it's dangerous physically, that's obvious, but it's a dangerous environment spiritually. Dangerous, not fatal. Baruch Hashem, there are people who go into the army and they remain firmly grounded in Avodas Hashem. They serve Hashem. They learn, they daven, they do mitzvahs, they do chesed. They're moser nefesh for Klal Yisrael, putting their lives on the line. These are great, 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 great tzaddikim that we have to admire. So sure, you can point to tremendous role models in the army who remain b'nei Torah. But we have to be honest. We can also point to many, many situations where there's been a yerida. A person goes in, a person could very easily lose his ruchnius. So if I'm a Haredi parent, besides the concern for safety, which every parent has, as a Haredi, I'm not more entitled to be concerned for my child's safety than anyone else. So that's kind of an empty argument. Hey, I don't want my son to go to the army because it's dangerous. That doesn't resonate. But as a Haredi parent, I can be genuinely afraid. I don't want my son to go into an environment which is dangerous to his ruchnius. And that is and that even covers the guy in the pizza shop, meaning not only the Shevet Levi person. So parents have a very, very legitimate fear. On the other hand, the problem is, once something is a milchemes mitzvah, where do you see that fear as an exemption from milchemes? That's the problem. Meaning, that's very bad. But mehechi teisi, that's going to be an exemption. So this is not a pashut thing. So we've gotten away with, for all the years, that there's no manpower shortage. That's kind of been okay. I can just tell you that it's really reaching a breaking point. Now, I will admit, I think the secular press is over-exaggerating that point a little bit. In other words, they want to make it like there's a dire emergency manpower shortage. It's not quite that. Baruch Hashem, it's not quite that. But there is a big stress on the system. And that's creating a lot of pressure for the Haredi world to rethink this.
Rabbi, if conquering the land of Israel is an obligatory commandment, can it not be argued that Jews from outside of Israel should also join the war effort in Israel?
It is very, very interesting that if something is a milchemes mitzvah, who says only the people who live in Eretz Israel are obligated, right? So you have somebody in America is knocking the fact that Haredim are not in the army. Well, why isn't he in the army? Who says there's no exemption for Chutz La'aretz people? Milchemes Mitzvah is an obligation on Am Yisrael as a whole. If you're Jewish, you have that obligation. So that itself is a very, very good point. No American has the right to talk about who should serve in the IDF. Milchemes Mitzvah is a chiyuv on everybody.
Rabbi, if conquering the land of Israel is a obligatory commandment, does the law that we find in the Torah apply, which gives us a leniency to take a non-Jewish woman in battle?
A few years ago, there was a military chaplain in the IDF who just gave a shir on this. He was not poskening. He gave a theoretical shir, which is worthy to talk about, How does Yifas Torah apply? And he lost his position because of this, because it seems like he was endorsing, wartime rape or whatever it would be. Now, the short answer is, though, it's interesting. If you look in Rashi in Parshas Ki Seitzei, Rashi says the din of Yifas Torah only applies to Milchemet Rishus, meaning optional wars, which we don't fight today. It does not apply to Milchemes Mitzvah. So, in a way, that makes life a lot easier, or at least, if not easier, morally less problematical. Because in point of fact, if we're magdir this milchama as a Milchemes Mitzvah, Rashi brings from the Sifri that in Milchemes Mitzvah there is no heter of Yifas Torah. So that I think would be the short answer.
So, Rabbi, if the Haredim could argue that the IDF does not need them, what then prevents secular Jews here in Israel from using a similar argument?
I mean, think about this. I'll make up a number. If an army needs 100,000 people, and you have a population base of 1 million, so any person could say, hey, you don't need me, get somebody else. So obviously, I don't mean to suggest that a person could normally just exempt himself by saying, get somebody else. But I meant when there are compelling reasons. A full-time Torah study, it endangers the spirituality of my family. As I meant to say, that if they don't need us, that gives us the right, or at least the ability, to formulate principled objections to the military service. In other words, it gives strength and legitimacy to the other claims that I have. That's all I was saying. If I don't have another claim in particular, then Einochinami, I'm going to be no better than anybody else in that situation. The short answer is, it's not very clear at all that we can do this, meaning how are you going to... this is a triage problem, meaning to say, if the army needs a certain number, and that would have to come from the Haredim, at that point, who decides who goes? There would have to be a triage. Now, one of the triages that's mentioned is the notion that the people who are most exceptional in learning should stay in the base medrash, and other people go. But you're correct. I mean, you can even make the opposite argument. You can make the argument the strongest people should go, meaning the spiritually strongest people should go, because they're the least likely to get hurt. Meaning it's bedafka the weaker people. When I say weaker, I mean weaker in ruchnius, who are most likely. So instead of saying, let's make the weaker guys the sacrificial lambs, one can make the argument, let's make the strongest people. Send them to the army and they'll do Kiddush Hashem and everything else. So it's a real problem. I mean, as I say, I can tell you that in the Haredi world, I mean, among Rosh Hashivas, among poskim, the external veneer is a unified front against this. But I can tell you that behind the scenes, there's a lot of agonizing thought about the need to consider alternative scenarios. So it is something that's very much an alive topic. I just have to clarify something because I need to make the statement. We talked a lot about the draft, about Haredim and the draft. I just want to make the point, just a fundamental point, that certainly every Maimon understands that as important as the Army is, and we have to appreciate the Army, we also recognize that ultimately the Hatzlacha comes into the world through Limud Torah and through mitzvahs. Now, again, halachically, that doesn't automatically translate into an exemption from Milchemes Mitzvah. It is a reason why, if there's no manpower shortage, we ought to favor Lomdei Torah, because they are in fact contributing to the security by what they're doing on a very, very high level. It is important. I don't want anyone to leave with the sense, maybe it's again my fear of hate mail, but of a diminished appreciation to the role of Limud HaTorah. It's something that we have to recognize, and we have to believe. We have to believe it. We have to believe, as strange as it might sound, that the Taisvus that you learned at Night Seder may have saved somebody's life in Gaza. We don't understand the causes and effects, but they are real and they are significant, and we can't forget that, which is why you always have to have that perspective as well. Even in the United States, when the United States had a draft, World War II, and even in Vietnam, so full-time theological students were exempt from military service. That's why the yeshivas had the largest populations in the 1960s. And I remember I had a draft card, and I had whatever the exemption was for. I don't remember what it was. So even a secular society recognized the importance of men of God. In fact, there's an interesting story about my Rebbe, Rav Klevsky. I think I may have told you, but I'll repeat it very quickly. But he was actually a soldier in World War II. He was learning in Torah V'das, and he was drafted. How did he get drafted? The government sent over people to determine if you were sincerely a rabbinical student. And he, for some reason, everybody was told, when you're asked a question, say you're studying to be a rabbi, because that's the exemption. He didn't want to say he was studying to be a rabbi. He says he's studying Torah because God wants him to spend his time learning Torah, lishma. So the government didn't buy that answer. Oh, you like to read books? You're exempt from the draft because you want to read? He refused to say that he was studying to be a rabbi. As a result, he was drafted. He was in the army for 18 months. Baruch Hashem, he was not shipped to Europe. He was doing domestic stuff. He did a lot of KP duty, a lot of digging. He learned Yeridea during that time. In fact, Yeridea became one of his greatest. It's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him matana, like what he knew everything, Klar, but this was especially Klar in Yeridea, and that is what he learned in his 18 months in the army. It's very, very fascinating. After 18 months, a federal court ordered his release. They said that the government abused its discretion in drafting him, and he won his court case, but it actually took 18 months. So he was able to get off every Shabbos. Every Shabbos, he was given permission to leave his military base and go to yeshiva on the condition that he wear his army uniform. So he would go to Torah V'das. He wore his army uniform. He had to wear his army uniform. And he gave a shir, gave a chabura. Like, you come in, this is the 1940s. He would be giving a chabura in his army uniform. And that's how he met his shidduch. I'll tell you the story too. He would go into a Sfarim store in his army uniform, and he'd be looking at the Ktsos, Oneg Yomtov, and a person thought, hey, he's an army guy, he must be an ignorant guy. He's probably looking for a siddur or an English chumash. So he says, you don't want the Oneg Yomtov, you want the siddur over here. He said, no, I'm looking at the sefer. And there was a Hasidic Rebbe there who was so impressed that he decided to make a shidduch for his daughter with Rav Klevsky, and that's how he met his shidduch. If he would have been a regular guy wearing a suit, it wouldn't have impressed the person so much. He wouldn't have paid attention. So Hashem has mysterious ways. Getting drafted, being in the army uniform, that was how he was zeicha to his shidduch.
If you are someone watching this video and wondering what the meaning of life really is, then you should definitely watch this video next.